My name's Selena Steiger with IslandWood Urban School Programs team, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm really excited to learn with you all today. So I have a couple points of contact here today, and one of them is to share with you the agenda. So we are starting out after I'm finished talking a little bit about group norms, and we'll do a little waterfall activity. And if you don't know what that is, you will soon find out. It's really fun. And then we will move into our discussion of place and gardens as culturally and scientifically significant and our connections to place. We have a Padlet that we're using. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, we'll spend some time with our reflection questions in Padlet, and then move into hearing more about the lessons that the garden lessons that folks in this group have worked on. And then we'll have some discussion, and then we will regroup and share out and have questions and answer time. And then we will close and be finished by 6 o'clock.
All right, thank you, Selena. Hi, everyone. I'm Tabitha Mazer. I work with the Self-Help Projects program at SPS, and my pronouns are they, them, and she, her. And today I am going to share a little bit about group norms and group norming. And so this is something that our intention with the network is just a way to, yes, provide garden education, but also provide you all with the opportunity to go deeper and also just think about how are we showing up as educators and in community here. So the process of norming provides us an opportunity to express group values, how do we want to show up in spaces, and also share what our needs are. What do we need from others in space to be our best selves and do our best work. And so here are a few of the group norms that our team had kind of collaborated on putting together. A lot of these are informed from the Seattle Schools Department of Racial Equity. They also had a process of creating group norms, so those inspired some of these. So I'll just share with them. So one of them is creating nurturing spaces. And what this could look like is finding ways to extend warmth and kindness to one another, as we lean into building a spirit of trust and community building, listening to understand, embracing waiting and awkward silences with an open mind. I know that sometimes when difficult conversations come up or there's something that maybe touches on something for you, it can be just an opportunity to pause and listen. Let's see, recognizing and counteracting imbalances of power. So this is like making moments to invite voices that maybe haven't been heard yet and being aware of our own identities and airtime. Making space for learning. So embracing mistakes, which is a big theme today, and trying to, view mistakes as gifts and rather than indicators that show our faults, and we're here to learn. We also want to uplift and make space for diverse personal and cultural gifts and to actively create spaces that invite diverse communities and celebrate them. And then we also want to highlight that multiple truths can exist at the same time. So this is kind of like a yes and, or, and also language instead of either and or. And to just maintain a sense of compassionate curiosity as we are sharing our stories, listening to others, and as we are just in spaces with students and spaces with other humans. And so we have an activity that is in the realm of norms and to open up the space to you all to share things that are important to you. Felicia?
Yeah, this was one of my favorite activities to do with my students while we were virtual. I was constantly trying to find ways to get them in the chat and to just feel connected while we're all staring at our screens. It's a bit harder. And I know last time I really loved how connected we all got to feel as we learned. I think that's important. So the waterfall activity is pretty simple and you've probably done it. Just to go ahead and get your answer ready in the chat, but we don't enter until it's time, and I'll count us down. So go ahead and take a moment, review the 6 norms that Tabisa just laid out for us. We've got create nurturing spaces, make space for learning, listen to understand, make space for diverse personal and cultural gifts, recognize and counteract imbalances of power, and multiple truths can exist at the same time. So as you look these over, maybe there's one that really resonates tonight, or that you really want to challenge yourself to keep at the forefront of your mind throughout this learning session together, or one you'd really like others to keep in mind. So go ahead and, even if it's just a part of it, get it ready in the chat, and then I will count us down. And when I get to 0, we will all press enter at the same time. So I'll give you a moment to choose yours and get it ready in the chat, and I'll do the same. Are we feeling ready? I'm seeing nods. Okay. Waterfall in 3, 2, 1. Waterfall in the chat.
It's like, do we make a sound? Is there?
I know, it's like a little anticlimax. No, this is great.
Oh, cool. Wow. All right.
Ooh, and we've got another
Cool.
addition. I love that.
Joyful spaces.
Compassion, acknowledging the beauty of paradox. Ooh. Lots of
Nice.
nurturing spaces are needed tonight. I am with that. Very cool.
Absolutely.
Thanks, you all, for participating. We will hold those throughout the night, come back to them if needed. And yeah, maybe revise this list for the next time with a couple of the additions that y'all have shared.
Awesome. That was really great. I love that waterfall, Felicia. Thanks for sharing that. That was awesome. I will also introduce myself. My name is Sharon Seal. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Youth and Families Program Director at Tilth Alliance. And now we're going to move into sort of the professional development part, or the talking about sort of the topics that we're discussing this evening. And we're going to begin with thinking about place. And as Selena mentioned, that thinking about the garden as culturally and scientifically significant, and also our connections to place. And so this is also just kind of a very brief overview. It won't be as long as we discussed at our workshop in November 8th, but it's for folks who going to brush up on it again, kind of refamiliarize with these ideas and concepts, and also for folks who weren't here last time to join in with those components as well. Okay, next slide, please. So the really great thing about place is that there's so much of it. It can be anywhere. It can be in school grounds, it could be a garden, it can be in an alleyway, it can be in the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, it could be at a park nearby. And we're also thinking about place too in school gardening, in our school grounds, as an equity issue, and that outdoor learning can happen anywhere. It doesn't need to only be just in a beautiful garden or a large forest or something like that. Nature and place and our connection to it can happen in many different ways and places. And so the lessons that we've been co-designing, oops, sorry, if you can go back one more. Yeah, thank you. The lessons that have been co-designed, they're not limited, that we're going to discuss a little bit later. They're not limited only to annual food gardens. There are many different places where these lessons can be explored. They can be explored in just a park or a forest or a permaculture space, or just walking down the street and the things that you see. So that's made it very sort of open and inclusive to a variety of ways that we're thinking about learning outdoors. It's not exclusively for food gardening. But we also want to think too about how humans understand and interact and make decisions around the natural world varies across cultural communities, and recognizing too that agriculture is a human practice that has been evolving all over the world for thousands of years, and that gardens are infused with cultural practices and reflect many different decisions and values, and also different ways of practicing science, and making sure that we're keeping these pieces elevated for ourselves. We also want to consider how humans and more than humans cultivate land together as well. So for example, we see down in the lower The lower middle picture is the picture of the beehive and the pollinator gardens. We're also thinking too, like about the range of shape, the range of structure and materials. What are the boundaries of gardens? What does that mean for us? Are they human defined? Are they defined by plants or animals? Take a look at the picture of this family harvesting clams from the intertidal garden. And what does that mean in that place to be a garden or a specific area? What defines that? And then there are also different ranges of purposes. Gardens aren't always just about food. They could be medicinal, they can be for materials, for habitat, for textiles, for food, for other animals, etc., and so forth. So in the same way, school gardens can be for nutrition, they can be for food access, they can be for restoration, pollinator pathways, therapeutic, de-stressing, etc. There's lots of different ways to think about gardening in general, and there's lots of different ways to think about school gardening and the ways that we interact with the outdoors at school. And so once we start to recognize the different histories, the variety and the possibilities of gardens, we can then think about how to create outdoor learning opportunities that are culturally responsive. And so keeping in mind that these things, they are connecting to lived experiences and identities, connecting to family knowledges and practices, and thinking to yourself, how will you learn how kids are relating to this place? But I also just really love this slide. I love looking at the different images of how people garden and how people raise food and how they are connecting with places in different ways, all the way from very urban spaces to the upper left-hand corner to places that experience a wide variety of climate, like our lower right-hand corner, where people are using greenhouses and cloches to trap heat and do season extension, to the center photo, where we're thinking about permaculture spaces or mounded gardens or keyhole gardens, and how that can really maximize ways of growing things, to the lower left-hand photo, which is a photo of a camas field, which is a very important crop to many different indigenous tribes in the Pacific Northwest region, and really interesting ways that we cultivate, or those people cultivate those spaces, particularly using fire to help bulbs grow, expand, and provide nutritious food and habitat and so forth. So yeah, what is your relationship to this place? And what are the relationships that your learners have to this place? Can look a lot of different ways. Next slide, please. So this piece may look familiar to some folks. The image on the left is the image of a lesson and also a framework that is called the Histories of Places. And this comes from a different project that Tilth Alliance and many other people on this call have been a part of, called Learning in Places. And that's it has its own website. In a second, I can drop that in the chat for you. It has a really lovely collection of resources around outdoor scientific learning, in a variety of ways for schools and nonprofits and families. But this is to say, we love to use this particular lesson about histories of places to also think about the complexities of place and the different ways that time and place and culture all interact. So place, put simply, is where and how culture and environment are co-constructed, right? These things exist together. And we look at this image here and we see 6 different, what we call sort of like time frames or time structures, beginning with sort of geologic time, moving into plant and animal and soil time, indigenous peoples time, nation state time, which starts to think about politics, economies, different social and human structures and how that impacts place and people's experience of it. And then the concept of global time, which is that we live now in a very global age. We ourselves may have lived in different parts of the globe. We may have family that lives in different parts of the globe. We have things that travel to and travel from all around the globe that impact our place and that we make choices about, or sometimes don't make choices about. And then finally, this one that's a big mouthful, but it says living ethical responsibilities and possibilities time, which is kind of a fancy way of saying thinking about the future. And as we look at these different time structures, sometimes folks might be thinking about it being chronological, when in fact, these pieces, they don't stop, like geologic time doesn't stop and then end into plant and animal time, right? Like these things are constantly interacting over time. And as things evolve and change, as humans are moving, as animals are changing, as our climate is changing as well. And so we also want to be mindful that, like, for example, geologic time, we can experience that now in our global time, in our nation state time. And so some folks may say, well, how is that possible? A recent example might be the eruption of Mount St. Helens is a massive geologic experience. The deconstruction of dams in our area is another geologic experience that's connected also to nation state time and indigenous peoples time. So these things are constantly speaking to each other. But the other thing that really highlights, though, is this concept that place is not neutral. And so that's really, really important as educators that we keep that in mind, right? Like our experience and the kids that we work with and the families that we work with and the other teachers that we work with may have very different relationships to the place that we are in this time, in this place at our school or in our neighborhood or in our homes. And so this piece too is really fundamental, is that people have varied and political and contested histories. So we could be sitting next to our neighbor in the same place and time, but have things that are frankly contested, right? That they don't have any sort of overlap or experience in that way. And so that's also really related to power and privilege and how we think about our place and our experience in our place and how we think and teach in that particular place. And also just really want to recognize that sometimes place and experience in place can be painful. And we need to be able to hold and honor that, but also remembering to hold stories of resilience, of values, of creativity, of healing and community, all of these things. And while it's complex and can be difficult to do, it's really, really important and makes your learning and your connections with place and also with other students that much more rich and valuable. And just possibilities are really much more expansive when we are holding these pieces together. Next slide, please. So really just a quick kind of thought about your place where you garden or are working outdoors with kids, and to think about how you are connecting this with more nuanced perspective of place. And how will you begin to make the connections between the complexities of your place and your lessons and your students? And so some of these questions I think are just interesting as we hold even when we're out in the field or out in the garden teaching. So what is this place showing you? Who is here, right? Not just humans, but what are the histories of this place? Like constantly thinking about this all the time. What is changing? And what can we learn in, with, and from this place? So the ending sort of question about this that we're going to continue to expand on until 6 o'clock this evening is, how would you strengthen or deepen your garden lessons or your lessons outdoors, thinking more deeply about place? And the really lovely thing that we're going to move into now is also our personal connection to place. Sometimes as educators, we forget that we ourselves are influenced by place, and we bring that forward. So Felicia and Tabisa are going to move us through that.
Thank you so much, Sharon. So part of how we're going to try to do this in a virtual space and thinking of deepening our relationship to space is through a tool called Padlet. And so this is something that you should have gotten with the invitation, with the link from Eventbrite, but we can also post it in the chat. Let's see, Colleen did that. And so this is a platform where we posted a few questions, and we framed them as pre-reflection questions to give you all a chance to hopefully take a peek at these before we gathered tonight. But if you didn't have a chance, that's okay. We will set aside 10 minutes for us to go through these. And so you can post in the Padlet anonymously. And it's just kind of a way to, provide a space for everyone here to share their stories and these reflection questions. And we can take a peek into the background of other people's experiences and kind of reflect on, how does that make me show up as an educator, as a gardener? And so thank you. So Selena has the Padlet on the screen. So that's how it looks there. In the very first column, it has some pretty detailed instructions, but really you can just click one of those white plus marks at the bottom, and then you should be able to create your own post in response to any of these questions. And so there's just 2 questions there. And we are going to take about 10 minutes now and allow you the opportunity to post your own responses to these questions if you'd like. And then also an opportunity to read through some of these really amazing responses that we've already gotten in here. If anyone has trouble accessing the Padlet or you need some help with making a post, please just let us know and we are happy to do a little demonstration.
And if I can just add to that, it may look like a lot written here within Padlet. And we did have some time to sit with this and think on it. So please know that every response should look different, could be interpreted differently, can have varying lengths, and we would just love to share even a bit of our stories with one another. And yeah, really just thinking about how did you get here? And what does that mean to you and your lineage, and what kind of things shaped that history, and how does that inform your present?
Okay, we are at 4:40. I feel like I could keep reading those for another hour just to take them in. But thank you all for participating in the Padlet. As Felicia said, it will be there, so feel free to go back and revisit it anytime. And I think we are going to move on now to Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. Those are so wonderful to read. Thank you everyone for sharing. It's so great. Before we get into sort of the lesson discussion and our breakout rooms, I just wanted to give a little bit of a background of how this came to be. And so there was, at our last session in November, we discussed a little more in depth, but the work around the lessons has come from a USDA Farm to School grant that was in partnership with Tilth Alliance and Solid Ground. We also worked really closely with Seattle Public Schools and Self-Help Program and a variety of different classrooms and teachers from across the district. We were focusing on Title I schools and thinking about how we can support classroom teachers to feel more ready to be working outside and just more comfortable with a variety of different perspectives of how to teach outdoors, and then also some of the lesson co-design that we worked with our co-design group. And some of those co-designers are here on this meeting tonight, and I'm so glad to see you here. It's really wonderful to kind of see this full circle moment right now. And so part of our implementation from that was we offered some Garden Educator Workshop series of courses to the teacher cohort that we worked with. We had about 18 teachers involved with that. And then we also did this garden lesson co-designs. We had 9 different members. We had 3 classroom teachers. We had 2 parents. We had district staff. We had 3 nonprofit members. And it was really, really rich discovering all of this work together and thinking about how we wanted to think broadly about gardening, how we really wanted to center place, and also key to that was relationships as well. So many thanks to folks who were involved with that. Gives us maybe just a little bit of background of kind of what we're doing here and where it came from, and why we're so glad. So here are some of the co-designed lesson outlines that we're going to review today. But before we get into that, when we were working with this group, oh no, sorry, you can go back to that other slide, slide 16, thanks. When we were in the co-design group, so the group of 9 folks who were thinking about garden education or outdoor education with children outside, we were brainstorming and came up really what we called sort of 4 big ideas. So 4 sort of core ideas that we felt were really important to sort of highlight and spend some time focusing on. And this is all to say that there are so many wonderful garden curriculums out there, and everyone, many of them are free on the internet. There's lovely things you can purchase from a variety of bookstores. There's trainings and PDs you can go to, lots and lots of really wonderful stuff out there. But we really kind of wanted to think about and focus on areas that we felt were sort of less visible or less prevalent. And first and foremost, one of those big ideas was place, ecosystems, and biodiversity. And so this is sort of our core underpinning of all of the different lessons that we're teaching, which is why we started our session today with that concept. The next big idea is cultural knowledges and identities around food and gardening. Also, relationships with humans, land, garden, and more than humans, or more than humans can also mean birds, animals, soil, sun, water, rocks, etc. And then also stewardship and caretaking, and how that is a really important component and opportunity for students and teachers and families to be thinking together, sort of beyond sort of the just different kinds of lessons or different kinds of activities that we're doing in the garden. So today we have 3 new lessons to review with you. We have the cultural knowledge about food, which is what do you eat? There's caretaking and stewardship, which is learning from mistakes in the outdoors. And then garden ecosystems, which is relationships and reciprocity. So those are the 3 that we'll review today. Could somebody drop the link to the Google folder into the chat? So you should have received a link to these lessons in the email today, I believe, and let us know if you can't access it. We'll figure out a way to get those lessons to you right now. You don't need to read them all through. We're just going to give you a high level sort of overview, and then we'll have some time together to chat in discussion with you later. And then if you click one more time, Selena, the lessons that we reviewed back in November, the ones that were ready at that time, and just click one more time, did some fancy animation today. The ones that we talked about last time was cultural knowledge about food. So where does food grow? Thinking about foraging, and then caretaking and stewardship. Whoops. There we go. Everyone is a caretaker. So thinking about the opportunities that all students have, no matter their age, and thinking about stewardship and caretaking. And then our last lesson in November was garden ecosystems, relationships between humans, gardens, and the beings that live there. And so these 3 lessons will become available after today's session. We'll perhaps keep it in the same Google Drive folder that's open to the public. We may post it also on like Tilth and Solid Ground and Self-Help's websites, but they're free and open. You can totally use them. They're ready to go for you to use at any point in time. And we'd love to hear also your thoughts outside of this meeting and within as well. Great. So I think we'll start it off, which I think it's Bella. And Bella, you should introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Bella. I'm the youth education coordinator at Solid Ground on the community food education team. And I joined the curriculum development project basically like my first week at Solid Ground was when the first co-design session happened. So then I sort of just jumped straight into it. And it's been a really cool process to be a part of. And I wrote the 2 lessons in the cultural identities and knowledges section. And anyone who's at the workshop where we talked about where does food grow, that was the other lesson, where we talked a little bit about foraging and sort of thinking more expansively about where food comes from. And with this lesson, what do you eat? I really wanted to provide a space for students to be thinking and engaging with their own preferences, and not in a way that was judgmental about what their preferences are, or couching their preferences in like expectation, but actually just like letting them delve into what they like to eat. So as you know, I wrote here, like, we share food. That's what food is for sharing with others, with community and family and friends. But we also have our own individual preferences. And so we're, you know, communally informed and also internally informed in terms of what we like to eat. I just want them to be able to talk about both of those things. And also, you know, when we're thinking about garden education, it's really important that we're actually growing food that the communities and people that we grow food for want to eat. It's obviously great to grow things that push people to try new things, or give them the opportunity to try vegetables that maybe they're not familiar with. But for example, Solid Ground works with the CMAR community health clinics, and we grow a lot of kale, like any farm in the Pacific Northwest does. And the people at CMAR were like, please stop bringing us kale. Like, nobody here wants to eat this. This is not a culturally relevant food. They don't know how to use it. Please stop giving it to us. And that's important because it's the thing that grows best in the Pacific Northwest. But if nobody's going to eat it, then it's not actually that valuable. We can go to the next slide. So the goals of this lesson are for students to identify foods that they like, don't like, or are unfamiliar with, to improve self-awareness by thinking critically about food preferences, and to improve social awareness and engagement by talking to peers about their food and flavor preferences. So to do that, we basically provide some activity ideas around showing students different foods and asking them to give either like a thumb temperature or just to raise their hands if they like it or if they don't like it. And then having them talk beyond just, I like that or I don't like that, but actually saying like, here's what I don't like about it, or here's why I've never tried it, or maybe they've been too nervous to try it because they heard that somebody else that they know doesn't like it, which is like a thing that I did all the time as a kid because I was really picky. And so anybody who said that they didn't like something, I was like, I also don't like that because I'm certain I won't like it. So I think, yeah, just like giving them space to talk through those things and think through how they think about food and what kinds of food they like. And emphasizing that it's okay to not like foods, which I think is messaging that kids don't always get. Like, I think they often are, expected to like the things that are put on their plates. And I think it's really valuable to counteract that and let them have the preferences that they have, because we all have preferences as adults too.
Okay, thank you, Bella. So I worked on the lessons regarding to caretaking and stewardship. And so in the first session, we did a lesson on everyone being a caretaker and just kind of exploring different ways that we can encourage young students and really students of all ages to see themselves as caretakers. And then, so for this lesson, it is focused on embracing learning from mistakes in the outdoors. And kind of the concept behind this, as was discussed in the co-design groups, was that, acknowledging that nature provides just this wonderful container because it's a resilient environment and it's, full of generosity and is a very forgiving space for people to be able to model making mistakes and getting comfortable in learning from mistakes, addressing mistakes, as well as the opportunity to embrace learning from mistakes and developing agency and thinking through decision processes and figuring out how can I have an impact. Thank you. So in the lesson for this one, it walks through a lot of different activities and just kind of like thought processes that we can just encourage students in outdoor spaces to get really curious about not only mistakes that they might make, but also observing things in nature, like do animals ever make a mistake? Have you seen a squirrel maybe bury an acorn somewhere and then maybe they forgot about it, but now it's an oak tree. So I think there's all kinds of examples within nature where things that might be on the surface level a mistake can, find their way, to continuing on the ecosystem. And so this lesson also invites students to learn how to make amends after making a mistake. One example that we had from a teacher is, sometimes students have antsy fingers and just need something to do when you're supposed to be seated out in the garden area. And so maybe you start tearing off the leaves from a plant and, oh, now that plant is going to have a hard time making your tomato. And so those are different things that, we can acknowledge, that we've done something, but also like learn from it and make a different choice and maybe remedy it as well. And so this is all along the same realm of helping students see themselves as stewards in their environments and just being able to embrace opportunities as they come up.
Great. And then the third lesson that we have is thinking about relationships between humans, gardens, and local ecosystems, and thinking specifically about reciprocity. And so this is a follow-up lesson from the one that we thought about in November, which is just purely about relationships. And in that particular lesson, we thought really about centering the garden and how humans, making sure that we really focus also on how humans are a piece of the garden and the many different intricate relationships that are there. So that was more sort of establishing relationships, thinking about relationships you might not be able to see. And what does that really mean? How are we connected to different things in the garden? I love this photo on the right, which came from a class maybe that Bella taught. I can't remember. But all the really amazing generative relationships that the class discovered together and was able to document and how they're all connected. And it's really, really lovely. So in this particular lesson, we introduced the concept of reciprocal relationships. And again, really intentionally including humans as a part of the interconnected web of relationships in the garden. Sometimes when we're thinking about the out of doors, or when we're thinking about like in science textbooks, sometimes humans are really sort of removed from ecosystems or removed from the garden, right? Like it's everything else has the relationship and the humans are kind of looking down at it or with their magnifying glass separated from it. But rather we know we're intrinsically related to and have reciprocal relationships, whether or not we may acknowledge it or notice it in these different ecosystems, including the garden. So this lesson thinks a little bit about the importance also of caretaking, so supporting the lesson, the themes from the lesson that Tabisa just mentioned, and then nurturing relationships that are mutually beneficial in the garden ecosystem, including humans, and actions that then support those relationships. So really it's framing it, and this is kind of a reminder that these lessons are really meant to be more outline and provide you some structure to then adapt them how they speak best to your particular classroom. That was something that we heard a lot from the teachers in our co-designing group, was to leave these outlines a little more open and not be so instructive about exactly what people should say or exactly how they should do it, but to really be able to move and adapt it to your particular needs and environment and kiddos. So the goals and objectives of this particular lesson is that students will understand the concept of reciprocal relationships, where benefits of helping one another are mutual, how we help one another in different kinds of ways. Students will be able to identify reciprocal relationships in the garden. So beginning to sort of notice those pieces and name them and name the different components of those reciprocal relationships. And then also students will understand ways to support those reciprocal relationships in the garden. So those are sort of the different steps that we're understanding what that means. We're able to identify what those reciprocal relationships may look like and how we're connected to them, and then how we can support those pieces. I did actually, before we move on, I did say a big thank you to our co-design group, but I did want to give a little shout out to Tilth Alliance staff, Sabrina, Nancy, and Benet, who were a huge help sort of after the lessons were created and editing them and making them look beautiful in graphic designs and really helping them get to our sort of final polished piece. So big shout out to you three.
Okay, I get to tell you about our next piece of the workshop is to get into some smaller groups and start having some conversations about the lessons that were just shared with you, and then kind of folding in and integrating what we've been talking about with our own relationship to place. So we have some questions that can help guide that discussion here on the slide, and we will put those in the chat as well. But we are going to have 3 groups, and within those groups, they'll be random, but Sharon, Bella, and Teresa will be in those rooms to help facilitate that conversation and answer questions and things. But then we will be coming back together and sharing out. So please identify someone who is willing to share a little bit about that conversation once we all come back together.
Sure, I'll go. So I think we sort of made a bit of a breakthrough, and it was talking about the names we use in gardens and how they might be restrictive and how we might overcome that, but also use it as lessons. So to wit, most of this, I'd say, like, all the scientific names for plants and insects, etc., are Latin. And for a lot of people, it's like, why are you like, I mean, it's calendula. Why are you like calling it something else? It's like, and that really probably like puts people off from learning, more things about a plant, because like, well, I have to learn Latin to learn how to garden, and that's ridiculous, So we bring it up with students. It's like to give them the chance to like, well, this is called such and such, and here's the Latin name. What would you call it? What would you, and why would you call it that? And then we can go into explaining that sometimes the Latin names are very illustrative of what we're actually talking about. But that doesn't necessarily mean that sticking to Latin or the way that we got there, because Latin is a language of conquerors, to be frank. Doesn't mean that we necessarily have to stick to it, but if we do, we need to figure out names for stuff. And if we're going to figure out new names for stuff, how are we going to do it? And, this is your chance to take that on. And there actually is a good argument for you to consider this. So that's sort of what we came up with.
I love that, Tony. And I can go next for my group. I also feel like I have to give a shout out to Beacon Food Forest. And the last time I saw you, Tony, we were working on some of the signs for Beacon Food Forest. And y'all made sure to include the name of each plant in 5 different languages. And then my understanding was, like, as people come and visit the food forest and maybe have different names for different things, they'll be able to share that through a survey. And then, over time, those signs could be more reflective of even more of the other names that people have for things, because there are just like so many depending on your context, right? So y'all at Beacon Food Forest are just at the cutting edge, doing great stuff. My group was really, really brilliant. And so there were so many gems, and I'm going to do my best to quickly capture them. We had a lot of teachers in the group. So we were thinking a lot about like, ooh, this lesson is so amazing, but like, what if you extended it in this way or adapted it in this way? So we were looking at the food lesson, which we loved. And Nirvani in our group offered us the idea of, she'd previously done a similar lesson and had, instead of the teacher kind of directing the conversation, decentering the teacher and having the students interview each other about the foods they eat, what they like, why they like them. Yes, it does tie back to the norms. Look at you, multiple truths. Yes, nice. So yeah, I really, really liked that idea. Whether it's kindergartners or seniors, I think having students talk to each other, discuss, and then bring that knowledge back together as a whole is just a great way to, rethink how learning can happen. I also think that Nirvani offered us a lot around just like questioning binaries that may show up. So like, instead of asking, do you like or dislike? What if it was more like a spectrum? And then it was like an activity that involved movement, and kids had, a sticky note, and they got to come up and say, on a scale of, this to here, that's how much I like this. And then have a discussion about, well, why is that? Does it depend? Does it depend? Does it have to be made by your grandma? Maybe there are some like, requirements. So I loved that idea. I love to get the kids up and moving also. And then we mostly also talked about the reciprocal relationships lesson. We talked about some really cool things Vera has done around insects and bugs, and a little bit just about how a lot of beings we relate to, maybe there's barriers because of some of the stories that are sometimes codified through culture and media around certain things being, pests, or certain things being seen as negative. So like I'm thinking of, vultures and flies and bees, and some things that I've grown up being made to think like I shouldn't try to have any kind of, relationship with this being for whatever reason. And learning as an adult that, flies are great pollinators, and without vultures, we'd all be surrounded with like rotten, gross, dead stuff. They're actually really deserving of our respect, our reverence. So thinking beyond like caretaking and stewardship, but also like how do we cultivate reverence for all the complex and cool ways that things interact and benefit us. And yeah, I did my best, y'all. I know there were so many other good things, but I'll stop there.
I can share for my group next. We talked about a lot of stuff as well. I'll start with the food lesson. I like that idea that you shared, Felicia, about using a sticky note to do like a spectrum. And it's funny because me and Nirvani actually just taught a food kind of centered camp last week, and we had a few sampling activities where we did something similar with sticky notes. And I was sharing about a version of that in my group where we encourage kids to, we challenge them to try to avoid, when tasting, avoid using words like bad or gross, but also to avoid things like good or delicious, and use more descriptive language instead of like, just trying to get kids to name what it is they're tasting and acknowledge the food for what it is, rather than like, oh, this is sour, and because it's sour, it's bad, and I don't like it. And then, we started talking about that because we wanted to acknowledge that like kids do have preferences, and like it is really great to validate that, but we also want to encourage kids to be adventurous and try new things, and knowing that it takes, however many exposures to a new food for them to be more open to liking it and to start to eat it more regularly. Just making sure that there's like a healthy balance of like, never forcing kids obviously to like eat something they're not going to eat, but giving them like a gentle, giving them gentle encouragement to try something in a safe place. And I think it was Laura, or no, it was Liz who was sharing that there was research done by a friend of yours. I don't remember, but there was just some guidance around like how to introduce new foods, and like you always want to have things that are more safe for kids and familiar to try, like alongside a new thing, give them the option to just taste it, and if they need to, just spit it, which might be different from a lot of our experiences growing up. And then another tool to use was just like as a group, try it together and like see that your peers are enjoying something, or like they're trying a new thing, and maybe you can do it too. We also talked about the garden ecosystem lesson a bit, and understanding that like and helping kids to understand that humans are a part of ecosystems and not apart from ecosystems. Like that's just something that's messaging that we receive, that like humans are separate from nature, and that's not true. And we need to start challenging those ideas that are put in kids' minds early, because if not, then that's like a dangerous path to go down. It like takes away from your ability to instill stewardship and recognize, nature for what it is. And it's the place where we are, and it's the place where we we build and we garden and we learn and we teach. Yeah, we were also talking about like some methods or some tips to like do a bit of classroom management or like encourage curiosity in gardens while also making sure that things aren't being stepped on or yanked or like harvested by people who haven't been taking care of the garden, and just doing it in a way that isn't like making signage that is just like, hey, don't touch this or don't pull this or like don't come near this. And rather than doing that, doing signage that's more like informative and educational, like, hey, this is a garden that is being cared for by Sharon's third grade class, and they're really excited to harvest these tomatoes in a few weeks. Or like, this is a plant that smells really good. Use 2 fingers to like rub it and smell it. Please don't yank, and like things like that. If kids like are really excited to do big play, which is often what they are used to when they go outside, having like a digging bed that is just for digging, or a path that is dedicated to running where they won't be in danger of like tripping or stepping in a bed and things like that.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing that. I think it's so fascinating that you share that, because the co-design group, like the folks who were in conversation about that, was one big thing that really came up, was like, how do we help make connections between school and home, or school and neighborhood, and really help that like the school garden is really special, but also like these amazing things are happening at your home as well. And they are equally as important and as formative. Like how much knowledge they were bringing to that space just with that question is so awesome. And like learning about families' backgrounds and how they're talking to each other and teaching about it and using senses and stuff like that. So that's like a really lovely connection that I know like Tony and Tabisa and Bella and others who aren't with us in this meeting, but really was hoping to kind of elevate. So that's really cool that this emerged. Thank you.
One other thing that brought to mind is that we can instruct kids that there is no borders in nature, right? It's like where does it stop? I mean, does it stop, because you're down the street, or where there are no borders, and this is your responsibility to take care of it everywhere, because there is no places where your work is not important. And that's what we've gotten away from in the West, where we've separated nature, and we're like, that's the human conundrum. I mean, this is like going into Nietzsche and all that other stuff, but I mean, humans have separated themselves from nature, and probably for their own protection, but we're animals, and we're just as dependent as everybody else. So
Ooh, this is good stuff. We could keep rolling.
One thing that they just came out with a study, and they're talking about how diversity on land versus oceans took off, and the key element were pollinators. Pollinators helped the diversity. Now there's more diversity on land than there is in the oceans. So, I mean, by a lot. And it was like, 100 million years ago that happened, but the pollinators were the ones that switched the diversity switch on. It's like, I know, it's like that's the amazing thing. We've come into this thing thinking, oh, we know, because we know science, right? We know it all, and we like do the science, and like we don't know shit. Tell you the truth.
That's really great. And Tony, I know, I mean, you know a lot about pollinators. I feel like every time we chat, I learn something new about pollinators, but that's like fascinating. Now I'm like, ooh, does pollination work underwater? Like, what does that look like? Clearly not. It's not the same thing. But I think, Tabisa, are you going to wrap us up here? Or we've had such a great time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was amazing and really wonderful and thoughtful discussions. And we appreciate everybody for joining us tonight, and also for being willing to try new things with the waterfall and the Padlet and these wonderful breakout room discussions. So thank you all so much. It means everything. And we do have one short exit survey. Okay, it's in the chat. It should just take a couple of minutes to complete. We would super appreciate it if everyone here could fill that survey out. It just helps provide some feedback. Again, if you posted in the chat that you do want clock hours for your time with us today, we have you written down. If you didn't post your interest earlier for clock hours, but would like to do so now, please feel free. And we'll be sure to get you on the list. And then Sharon will be following up with you to get you those clock hours. So if there's any other questions, any other things people want to share tonight, we do have a couple more minutes. I'll open the floor, but otherwise you are all welcome to take your survey, and then we'll see you next time.